How's it going, everybody? Welcome back to another session of Locally Sourced. I'm Carter, usual host, and today my guest is Karishma Manzur. She is running for the Senate seat that is being vacated by Jeanne Shaheen against Chris Pappas. Let's just bring her right in. Karishma, how are you doing this evening?
Having me.
Of course. It's an absolute pleasure to have you join the channel for a session. So, I guess we'll sort of get this. Let me get this one out of the way, and then we'll get into a bunch of other more intricate things. I'm curious what your strategy, your rhetorical strategy is when you are finding yourself in slightly more contentious environments when you're being interviewed. The thing that comes to mind is the most recent interview that you had on Close Up with Adam Sexton, where it seemed like he was trying to push you in some strange ways regarding just the manner in which we discuss the ongoing problems domestically. So I'm just sort of curious as to how you go about discussing issues.
Yeah, thank you so much, Carter. So I'm a scientist. I'm not a politician. So this is an absolute different arena for me. I've always been interested in politics, like the importance of the government in order to create a meaningful change and help people, the most vulnerable members of our society, is something that I've always hoped for or believed in. And so, but now that I'm inside this whole the grind, it's very different. So yes, I have to, I don't, as a scientist, I don't like that our issues are always so black and white, or we hate each other's opinions, or we're trying to be afraid of each other's opinions. No, at the end of the day, we all want to have a good life, right? We all want to be able to have a home, a safe home. We want to have enough to eat. We want our children to go to receive a good education. We want to be able to go to a job where we have benefits. It's just, we're all just asking for the bare minimum to survive. So when we're talking about any kind of topic, there's no reason for us to pull each other in, a negative, positive, or contentious situation. And this is one of the things, just as an aside, that really bothers me about Donald Trump, other than the fact that many things he's doing are so destructive. But he intentionally creates this narrative where it's such a wild story that you don't want to even challenge it. Like, Minnesota is being overtaken by murderers, rapists, pedophiles, and I'm the savior, I'm here to protect you. It's such a fairy tale, so out of the world, that people must say it must be true, because if it's not true, then it's a really big lie, right? So, and then he drives us into this narrative differences, like, if you are speaking out against Donald Trump's lies, then does that mean you're for the rapists? Oh, does that mean you're for the pedophiles? So anyways, it's a lot of work to try to cut through and bring light through that darkness. It's a lot of work. So I think what you were talking about was about ICE, right? ICE as an agency, ICE is a federal agency. It has a certain task to enforce immigration laws and customs laws. Previously, we used to have the Immigration Naturalization Service, INS, and we used to also have the Customs, United States Customs Control.
Right,
and they
CBP
kind of
was
merged.
basically in charge of that, yeah.
Yeah, and they kind of merged, and then it became ICE. But both in the first Trump administration and now we're seeing in the second Trump administration, my God, he has weaponized it. He has weaponized it to ask us to fear immigrants, ask us to be afraid of, immigrants are taking your jobs, immigrants are the reason your housing crisis is going on, immigrants are the reason the grocery prices are so high. And these are all lies, lies, and lies. So he wants us to hate each other. He wants us to fear each other, and by doing so, he wants to divide us. So let's just talk about ICE from a very factual perspective. As a scientist, that's what I like to do. Like, let's just move aside from all the rhetoric and just look at what is going on, just fact based. ICE has received now over 75 billion dollars. Sorry, $75 billion.
Right.
It is a
I
huge
believe
amount.
they're the third largest militaristic force in the world at this point. I think that was the maybe I might be
Yeah,
misconstruing that number, but I'm pretty sure that's not far off.
something like that, right? It receives more money than the FBI and our law enforcement. It's $75 billion. And then and and then we're finding out that in the rush to recruit these agents, they are circumventing proper background checks. Their training has been shortened to 6 weeks, I believe that's what they're saying, and they're being given so much immunity by being allowed to carry weapons into crowded neighborhoods, masked, without any insignia, without any identification, and basically harass people without a search warrant, circumventing due process, completely unconstitutional. So if those images are being captured, how can we see those images of people being dragged out of their cars or people being murdered in their cars? And then that we have to debate this narrative? How can that narrative be debated? I
Yeah.
believe in law enforcement. We have our city police, our state police, our town police, federal police, but those folks, most of them are wonderful human beings. They are polite, they're courteous, they're interested in public service. They don't break open the car doors. They don't drag us out of our houses. They don't come knocking on doors. Hey, are you an American citizen? Are you an American citizen? Like, what is this? So anyways, so then the discussion has to be based on reality, not this sort of fairy tale that Donald Trump is creating. So it's very difficult to bring people back to reality because Donald Trump creates this, like, again, this whole new world which doesn't exist. And unfortunately, a lot of the media, right-wing media, repeats these storylines, and then it creates a narrative that basically it's very difficult to fight against. So anyways, it's really, as a scientist, it's really difficult to cut through all this BS and just focus on facts.
Yeah, sure. No, I completely understand. And I think, just to add a little bit of context here, specifically because, this question obviously came up within the context of you being interviewed on WMUR. I try to remind people as often as I can, at least on this channel, that WMUR is owned by a company called Hearst. And Hearst originated as they're one of the sort of traditional original media conglomerate companies in the country. And William Randolph Hearst did indeed advocate in defense of the Nazi regime back during World War II. So there is a storied history of Hearst acting in this particular way, defending right-wing positions. Now, that slipped over time, moved into a more, what we would now consider to be a neoliberal model. And it's very easy to identify when watching WMUR, if you have any degree of media literacy, that they very much so are captured within the corporate umbrella. As the Democratic Party's tent has widened over the past several years to include people like Liz Cheney, as they reach further and further past center right to try and capture sort of the never Trump crowd, that now there's this feeling amongst, I would imagine, amongst the newsroom to try and appeal to those people of that particular mind, which is frustrating because they like to present themselves as sort of unbiased, as much legacy media does. But what it means is that the primary driver of news within the state has a particular bias attached to it, which goes unknown by a lot of the majority of the population within the state. and you end up with a lot of spin kind of locked into the phrasing and the formation of the questions that they ask. Now, I don't personally know anything about Adam Sexton's personal politics. I have heard from separate locations that he's actually probably left of center if you were to have a chat with him outside of the newsroom. But again, he's got to hold his job, and so he has to sort of play the line. And I think that came across when he particularly asked you, well, yeah, this is opposition that you're going to have to face when you're being, confronted with attack ads in the campaign. So how do you respond to this? So I understand where he comes from in that sense, but again, it's couched within this context of the goals of the organization writ large. And so that's kind of why I'm curious in particular about your strategy when walking into these scenarios. I personally was it warmed my heart a little bit to see you make an effort to reframe his questions and argue with him, give him some pushback on the context of reframing the news. But what I find interesting is a lot of times, rather than just out of the gate answering the question and then following up with the explanation, you'll explain a bit more before sort of addressing whatever question is coming head on. And I guess my question to you is this seems a little bit nitpicky, and I'm doing this in particular because I care for the issues in your campaign specifically, and I really want to see you win because I think it would represent us well in this state. And because of that, I want to be a little bit, provide as a bit of pushback in a sense. Why do you personally feel that it's imperative to do the reframing prior to responding to the question?
Interesting. So let's see. The question might direct you to an answer that is not going to help you understand the problem.
Sure.
So, for example, if a patient shows up and they have a fracture in their leg, and instead of saying and the doctor doesn't ask the patient, "Oh my God, what happened? How did you break the leg?" Instead, they say, "Wait a second, what kind of let's see, I don't know. Did you take Tylenol this morning?" Like something that is, maybe it's a yes, no, but it has nothing to do with the fact that you're showing up with a fractured leg and I need you to fix the fractured leg.
Right.
It's like, what did you have for breakfast? I mean, sure, that's a question, and it's sort of related to the patient, but it is not about that problem. It's sort of tertiary, or it's moving towards a different answer, and it's still, you can answer that question, but it will not resolve the problem. It will not give that information, like what is the root cause? How did you break the leg? Like what were you doing? Maybe stick to the issue. Don't ask something that is not related to the problem. But it looks like it is related to the problem, but it's not. So that's why I feel like, so if in this case, I would say to the doctor, let's not focus on what he had for breakfast. Let's ask what that patient was doing at the time he broke his leg. And so, and maybe let's also, let's open up the wound and just look at how bad the leg fracture is. And maybe let's take him to the surgery room and ask and start a surgery. So that's what I mean. Like, there's a problem. Let's focus on the problem. And maybe like later on, we can find out if the patient's leading a healthy life or not, etc. So in this case, for example, ICE is causing so much harm in our communities. And we see this in Minneapolis. It's like ground zero for what ICE is really capable of, the kind of terrorizing it's capable of. So you have to understand, whenever there's a bad leader, it really can disrupt the whole chain. Maybe under a good president, many of these agencies would not become so horrific. So the bad president is selecting bad cabinet members, like people who are either unqualified for their positions or have severe conflicts of interest and should not be in those positions. And then they kind of corrupt the agencies underneath. So it really is always about the root cause is always going to be what is coming from the top. So this is one thing. So I wanted to reframe it. Let's talk about Donald Trump and Kristi Noem so we can understand ICE, and what is exactly in Donald Trump's mind is the purpose of ICE, because it's definitely not about national security. It's about him controlling and terrorizing the populace. So that's one way to frame it. Let's talk about it that way. The second thing we have to talk about is when that system, that federal agency, has become so corrupt or unconstitutional or illegal behavior and terrorizing, we're not going to talk about what will happen to those 20,000 employees that are in that agency. We need to talk about what is wrong with that agency and how we should actually get rid of it, because it is causing so much harm to our communities. It is no longer serving its purpose or its mandated purpose. It is now being just used as a paramilitary, thuggish force. That's one. So it's like, you don't say, if when a Gestapo was going to be dismantled, you don't say like, well, those Nazis, they're going to be out of a job. Do you really want to get rid of the Gestapo? No, that's not how you start.
Man, that really got me. That one really got me in that interview.
That's a lot of people in the Nazi military. Do we really want to get rid? That's not how you frame a conversation. Or drug cartels. Well, if we get rid of the drug cartel, the drug trade, there are going to be so many mules who will be out of a job. Well, that's not how you start. You say,
well, the thing that was so fascinating to me about that particular exchange was like, he's saying like, well, what are we going to do about all these ICE agents who will be out of a job? And it's like, I don't know. They go back to doing what they were doing before they joined ICE, like less than a year ago. What are you talking about? Yeah. That's a preposterous way to frame the conversation. So I don't want to cut you off.
More cynical way would be, well, a lot of immigrants have left the country or been terrorized, have been deported. Maybe those farm positions are now open. The construction company jobs are now open, or the nursing home jobs are open. Those really terrible, low-paying jobs that these immigrant workers were involved in, well, they are now all opening up. So. But that's a very cynical trait.
One of my favorite personal hot takes is like, what we should do with the military is we should take away all their guns and Kevlar and give them hammers and tool belts and have them build all of this housing. But that's a separate discussion. So I do want to, because we've only got you for a limited amount of time. So I do want to make sure that we sort of, no, you're good. It's easy to get lost in the sauce on it. So let's see here. I want to take a minute to sort of pivot to the foreign policy side of things, because being in the U.S. Senate, that's actually one of the few places that we have power as elected officials to handle foreign policy. So while I don't really see that much of a point in having these discussions on a local level here in the state, when we're talking about our national delegation, I think it's very important to discuss these topics, because that's a huge, huge point of contention. Now, to sort of frame this up a little bit, when I look at your platform, a lot of the things that you advocate for, a lot of the rhetoric that I see you use follows very much so in the fashion of a traditional Bernie-crat. So like that we would understand since 2016, which I think is a great position to take. That said, Bernie Sanders was very, very late into the game in terms of calling what was happening in Palestine a genocide. You've been clear about that position. Another thing that I think people need to remember about Bernie Sanders is that he did indeed vote for Marco Rubio's confirmation. That's something that the Senate has a significant amount of power over. So my sort of question there is, within the context of Marco Rubio, you're talking about a Cuban diaspora child who grew up, hating Cuba as the child of exiles. There's a lot of sort of historical context there. But it was very much so his goal for an extremely long time to go after the Cuban regime, as he would consider it to be. I take a different track on that. I think they're a sovereign nation. They deserve to be respected. I don't think it's fair that they've been completely iced out of the global economy. And I think if we were to allow them properly into the global economy, we'd see a much more successful Cuba. That point aside, Bernie Sanders enabled, in a sense, what happened in Venezuela with the abduction, the kidnapping of Nicolas Maduro. Say what you will about him. I have plenty of gripes with the guy. But I do not think in any way, shape, or form it's appropriate to go into another country and just kidnap their leader because we want their oil, or we are looking for a sort of revitalization of the Monroe Doctrine, imperialism, which we're seeing a huge swing back towards that right now. And so in your position, would you find yourself to the left of Bernie Sanders within that context? Would you have voted, let's hypothetically say that you were already in the Senate during that confirmation proceeding, would you have voted to confirm Marco Rubio?
Oh, that's a good one. Wow. I don't want to question Bernie's, because I have so much respect for Bernie. So I don't want to necessarily throw the guy under the train, or under the bus, was it? Which transportation? But my issues are with Donald Trump. Donald Trump, yes, he won the election, but the man is a walking box of, like, he's a national security threat. He was a national security threat in his first administration. He continues to be a national security threat. Would I have supported Marco Rubio or not? Do I have to answer that hypothetical question? Because I'm going to say no.
Marco Rubio, I think that's a great answer. I think no is the answer I'd like to see.
I hate hypothetical questions. I'm sorry. As a scientist, it's really
okay. The only reason I ask this question is I know that it's sort of a weird hypothetical, right? But the reason I'm asking this question in particular is because the idea is more so to get a feel of how you would act in that sort of much more high pressure situation where there's definitely a lot of sort of motion that's going to be coming at you from your colleagues within the halls of the Senate, where there's a sort of process oriented, like, emphasis on just, we have to keep things moving, we have to keep things going. And I think for me personally, and I think for a lot of people that find themselves just even slightly to the left of center, at this point in time, looking at sort of the resurgence of American imperialism, knowing that we would not confirm people that we could look at and say, no, there's a historical record of this person having a deep interest in pursuing horrible policy that the United States has been involved in. And we can talk about Iraq and Afghanistan, but it's important to remember that this goes back much, much, much further than that. The storied history of the United States going into the global South, particularly South America, and putting up puppet regimes and doing insurrection movements that, you want to talk about Iran-Contra. We can talk about Pinochet. There's so many situations that go back many, many, many decades at this point that it's, I think a lot of people, when they say, I want anti-war, I want an anti-global interventionist directed candidate, they want to be able to see the wherewithal within those situations to say, no, I'm not going to confirm this particular representative to this position because they have a history of engaging in this particular type of activity. Do you see what I'm sort of getting at here?
Absolutely. No, I completely understand. I mean, we are in such a scary situation. People are so demoralized, so upset, and in so many ways. I think the biggest thing about Marco Rubio that would have, other than his position, like you're saying, with the Cuba, was the fact that he doesn't seem to be a very strong personality. A Secretary of State has to be there to not be a doormat for the president, has to be able to say, no, this is going to be in the best interest of our country. And I don't see that in him. All the cabinet positions are not there just to be a yes man or yes sir kind of person, right? They're supposed to be there to say, this is not in the best interest of the country. This is not in the best interest of our nation. This is not in the best interest of our economy, or it is in the best interest. Like, have that sort of sense of duty to the people. Many of the folks that Donald Trump nominated for his cabinet, like I said, either they're unqualified for those positions, they have severe conflicts of interest, and they're weak in character. They are sometimes they're part of the billionaire class, and they are going to profit from the industry that they're supposed to now regulate or be caring for. These are not the right people for these jobs. These are supposed to be really high quality, powerful public service positions. But of course, typical Donald, he brings in people that are just like him, not there to serve themselves and their big donors or to pad their wallet. And by the way, padding the wallet, let me remind folks, Donald Trump, in his only the 1 year of his presidency, the first year of his presidency, already has made $4 billion for himself and his family, $4 billion. And to put that into perspective, the annual budget of our state is $8 billion. Think about that. How he's making that money. So for example, he's always talking about tariffs. Oh, he loves that word. Okay, it's tariffs are on, tariffs are off, tariffs are 25% or 10% or 40% or 10%, constantly switching back and forth without any regard to national security or our economy or the people. This is just on his whim. Every morning he wakes up and he has some other axe to grind. So just to give you an example, Vietnam, it's a very small country. It is still impoverished. It is still recovering from the Vietnam War and also years of communism, et cetera. So it's a very small
American interventionism strikes again, you know?
Yeah. Okay. When he came into power, he slapped tariffs also on Vietnam. But then there's a golf course, Trump golf course, that's like in the plans. And normally it takes about 2 years for Vietnam, their paperwork to be processed. They fast-tracked the construction of this golf course, of this Trump golf course, not the United States golf course. It was not for the people of America, just the Trump family's private golf course that's going to be built in Vietnam. Once they fast-tracked the paperwork and the construction started, the tariffs suddenly came off. Donald Trump is using the power of the biggest economy, the United States economy, to bully smaller countries, but to benefit himself.
It has really nothing to do with helping the Americans. It has everything to do with helping himself, stroking his own ego. I mean, this is all sort of storied stuff, right? This is, and I think a lot of people knew about this kind of thing going back into the first term. It's my belief that he learned from his mistakes the first time around. He had brought in a lot of people that were more traditionally lauded by the conservative movement, found that he was facing a lot of pushback, and this time around we get a whole bunch of yes men. And that's more or less to be expected. It's also why we're getting such draconian measures against the American people. Now, I think it's important to emphasize the whole, we're going to drill a little bit further into this sort of foreign policy thing a bit here. I think it's important to acknowledge the concept of the Imperial Boomerang effect, where we see, fascism turning back onto ourselves here in this country. People, I said this on the most recent episode. I'm going to say it again. The IDF is directly responsible for training police forces and paramilitary forces in the United States, because we have such a sort of lockstep relationship with Israel. I think the joke that they are the 51st state is not a bad joke. I think it's a little bit too close to reality to be that funny in some ways. But if you look at what's happening in places like Minneapolis right now, in places, it's happening in Massachusetts, it's happening in California. There are places where it's happening that's very close to us here in New Hampshire. And I would not be surprised if it starts to happen here in New Hampshire as well. I think it's just sort of a matter of time that's ticking away. It's important to remember that much of the rhetoric that's used to describe the Palestinians and the way that they have been subjugated, they have been characterized as terrorists, is the exact same language and rhetoric that's being used to denigrate activists, protesters that are trying to stand up to ICE and push back in any way, shape, or form. And I think what happened with Renee Good is a perfect example. What happened the moment she was shot, before she was even out of the space of the zone, you had Kristi Noem in a fucking cowboy hat standing up on a stage calling her a domestic terrorist. That's straight out of the Israeli playbook. And I know that you understand that it's not just Netanyahu. You're talking about Ben-Gvir. You're talking about Smotrich. You're talking about a whole bunch of different people that create a coalition of sort of a sickness, a anti-humane sickness in their minds. And that same logic is implemented, however idiotically, by people like Hegseth, by people like Stephen Miller. So there's very much so a tradition there. Now, the flip side of that is that there's the broader critique of the Democratic Party currently for not fighting back enough. You've got Chuck Schumer hugging Marco Rubio on stage after they kidnapped Nicolas Maduro. The other thing, there was news that just came out recently, within the past 24 hours or so, that Senator Jeanne Shaheen, and whose seat you are running for currently, and Lisa Murkowski have drafted a resolution, some legislation to try and press on, they're calling it the NATO Unity Protection Act, to prohibit the use of the U.S. Department of Defense or the Department of State to blockade, occupy, annex, or otherwise assert control over the sovereign territory of a NATO member state without that ally's consent or authorization from the North Atlantic Council, to reaffirm the United States' commitment to NATO unity and collective security. Now, I take a certain degree of issue with this, and I want to be clear that I'm not sort of like, I'm not saying this in the same way that Trump's sharing tweets right now where he's saying, Russia and China are the boogeymen, but NATO are the real enemies. That's not my critique here. My critique more so comes from the position of the existence of NATO has forced every single European nation to sort of relinquish a degree of sovereignty that they may have had to the United States because of the economic power that the United States is able to assert over the European Union and any of its member states. So, in effect, NATO has been a bit of a trap for these nation states that we consider our allies, and we're not helping them support themselves on their own. And that very much so led to, it's like NATO was a great idea during World War II, but through the maintenance of that particular system, as United States hegemony has increased over time, we've now seen a situation where it allows for somebody who's sort of the logical end conclusion of both neoliberalism and neoconservatism, like Donald Trump, to come in and do what the system had always sort of intended for it to do in the first place, which is just cry bully their way into just taking whatever the hell they want. And that has turned NATO into something that's actually bad for our allies. So when I look at this legislation that's coming through from Senator Shaheen and Senator Murkowski, I have to question the actual ability that it has to fundamentally make any real future or possibility for our allied states, and how it does not just inherently sort of try to reel us back to this sort of corporatist yet still sort of American exceptionalist context of maintaining a degree of control over Europe by sort of being the superpower that forces them to buy our weapons to protect them. You know, I realize that I'm getting sort of long-winded here, but I think there's a lot of context that's important. And, you know, for somebody who's running for the U.S. Senate, I think you would have to encounter some of these problems at some point anyways. So we might as well just get it out of the way now and have the conversation at this point in time. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, you covered so much, Carter. I mean, you're talking about a long history and what is the purpose of NATO? Does it still serve its purpose? During as a counter to the Warsaw Pact, it made sense to have NATO there. But now, since the collapse of the Soviet Union, does it still make, and the Cold War is sort of over right now. Of course, there's still contention going on from the Eastern Bloc and the Western Bloc. Does it still make sense for NATO to exist? Has NATO served its purpose? The interesting thing is, we could have had this conversation in a situation where the United States, a NATO member, was not a threat to NATO. So now it becomes a very complicated conversation. So if we were having this conversation, say, 10 years ago, then we would have just been talking about, does NATO still serve a purpose? But then, of course, given that Russia attacked Ukraine, it changes the dynamic. Okay, now the conversation's like, do we still need NATO? Because is Russia acting like an imperial power that's not only going to attack Ukraine, but keep moving further west into Poland, and also the Baltic states are really afraid of Russia right now. So shouldn't NATO exist to actually control Russia? So that would have been one conversation. And now the United States, the sitting president of the United States, is threatening its NATO allies. I mean, Donald Trump is so confusing. It is so confusing. Every single morning he wakes up and he has some crazy idea. What happens at night to this man? I don't understand. I mean, like, what demons is this man fighting? Does he have dreams, nightmares? Where does he get all these crazy ideas from? Every single morning he wakes up and he says something completely insane. Let's just either in criticism of Canada or some other foreign country, or about Minneapolis, or about let's see, Jerome Powell. It's always something or other. So it becomes so difficult to have a conversation that's logical, sensible, based on facts when you're dealing with Donald Trump as part of the equation. So you brought up a lot, and I don't know how to answer it without maybe taking a step back. That this is when I have to always say, let's take a step back into reality and let's just talk about it. There are a lot of issues with NATO. The fact that Donald Trump bullied NATO to spend 5% of their GDP on military weapons at a cost to their economy, to their society, to purchase weapons from the United States alone was a mad idea. And that was about a year ago. NATO was like so nervous. All these NATO allies were so nervous about Donald Trump, like his tariff threats and his craziness, his erratic behavior. They were like, fine, we will spend 5% of our GDP, even though that means it's going to cause a lot of stress on our economy, a lot of stress on our social programs and our citizens. We will still, because you're a madman and you're in charge of you're unfortunately in charge of the largest military, somebody who is erratic and does not live in a reality, and he has extremely superiority complex. At the same time, he has a lot of inferiority complex. Like this man, I think it will be very interesting to study by psychiatrists and psychologists, but okay, that's fine. Yeah. We have him and we have nothing to do with this now. So NATO now said, okay, 5% of our GDP, fine. And then at the same time, he turns around, no, NATO is no longer necessary. We are going to dismantle NATO. Oh no, NATO is necessary. So there's a lot of chaos. I don't know what to answer. But what I do want to say is, what is interesting is he's talking about Greenland because it is part of NATO. And he's saying Greenland we need to take over Greenland. The United States has to take over Greenland because we have to protect Greenland from China and Russia, right?
Right.
That's what his rhetoric is. What if Greenland was part of an alliance?
Yeah, exactly.
That would protect Greenland from China and Russia. Oh my God, let's think about, let's call it a military alliance. Well, let's call it a military alliance that, with friendly nations in Europe. Oh wow, let's also bring in some other countries that are west of the Atlantic, maybe the Canada. Oh, Canada's a great one to be partnered with. United States. What should we call this? Should we call this a North Atlantic Treaty Organization like NATO.
Yeah,
let's
right.
let's call it that. And that'll be a military alliance that'll protect the member states. It already exists. We don't have to worry about China and Russia. NATO is protecting Greenland. This whole concept from Donald Trump that we have to take over Greenland in order to protect it from China and Russia is a lie. He is threatening NATO as a NATO ally. So it's a lot. I don't know what Lisa Murkowski's doing, and I don't know what Jean Shaheen's doing. I guess they're trying to protect NATO from Donald Trump and from the United States.
I do understand that it's a bit sort of blown apart and ridiculous. And I think,
but tomorrow he might wake up and he might be like, you know what? Actually, my bad. I think I'm going to focus on Los Angeles or California because now suddenly Newsom is his target. So who knows? Like with this man, you never know what he's talking about. And also, the one thing I do want to talk about, the way he talks about Greenland, like the first he wants to say he proposes like bribing the people of Greenland, right? Like, oh, I'm going to give them $10,000 or $100,000. First of all, where's all that money coming from? I thought we didn't have enough money to feed our children in the United States. Okay, suddenly we have a lot of money to bribe the people of Greenland. And then he says, whether they like it or not, he's going to take it. It sounds, you said adults will listen to it, but it sounds like a rapist language, doesn't it? Like somebody.
No, I think sort of the thing that I'm trying to get to here is that he's, for all of his, like, I've ended all these wars and like, he's just, I've gone and I've taken care of it all and whatever. He is a traditional imperialist. I think that's because look, he's a real estate guy, right? It is gonna get domestic again for a quick second, but the point is, like, landlords, real estate guys, they look at land, they look at property, they look at whatever, and they think about it in terms of like, how can it make me money? How can I benefit? Like, that is just sort of the capitalists' reinterpretation of imperialism within a smaller context that's got a bit more permission structure around it because there's profit to be made, right? But really, it all is the same thing. This concept of empire. It's not. This is the way he thinks. He's coming from the empire.
I don't know. I'm so sorry. I'm going to push back at you because I think you're almost trying to find a method to his madness. There is nothing but madness there. I'm sorry. I know that by calling him a real estate guy, people are like trying to frame it as if, he's coming from the real estate business. He only sees it as property. Therefore, he's trying to take over. Oh, he has the concept of imperialism. This is madness. It's not imperialism. It is not about real estate. It is just a person who is out of his mind, who has always been extremely crude, has never known his position in society. He has always, look at Access Hollywood tapes, the way he talks about another person, any kind of sovereignty or another person's body autonomy. He has no sense of it. If in his erratic head, he wants something and he grabs it, huh? You're going to fight back? Yeah, go for it.
I should clarify something really quick here because I think there's an important distinction that I need to make about this. I don't think it's deliberate or conscious, right? I think that I agree with you in the sense that it's not there. It is a type of madness. It's a type of sickness. But I think the context is that he's grown up. He's been sort of like educated within a frame that does contain the original notions of imperialism. So, and this is something that I try to point out to people is that like, there's not a particular degree of ideology that exists for right-wingers, right? If you are thinking about a working class person who's consistently voting for the Republican Party, despite the fact that it's against every single one of their interests, that person doesn't think about themselves within the frame of ideology at all, right? They think about themselves as apolitical. They think about themselves as being focused on, well, I need to earn, I need to make money, I need to, I need to look out for myself. So there's something that's happened as we've sort of repeatedly denigrated the American education system, is that everybody's got an ideology. It's whether or not they're aware of that ideology, right? Now, I think Donald Trump falls in this category of being blissfully unaware of the ideology that he exists within. Now, it's sort of trivial in a sense to discuss his ideology per se, but the reason I put it like this is because it's important, at least from my perspective, it's important for somebody who's his opposition to understand the mechanisms that cause the thing to work. Now, when you combine a learned form of sort of just seeing the world through that lens, whether you're conscious of the filter that's been put in front of you or not, you're still seeing it through that filter. And then when you pair that with sort of a life that's been filled with feeling inadequate, right? I mean, his mother called him stupid. You know what I mean? It's really just like, in many ways, his existence is tragic. And I think he's very aware of that. And so his sort of dry, I mean, I'm psychoanalyzing the dude right now, which is sort
of
pointless.
You're psychoanalyzing this man. Don't. You're going down a very, very dark space, and also endless. I'm going to push back and say, instead of focusing on his psychology, let's focus on what he is distracting us from.
Right.
He is, no matter what he's telling us to focus on, one day it's Minnesota, one day it's Los Angeles, one day it's Chicago, one day it's Jerome Powell, one day it's Greenland. At the end of the day, he keeps making money. He keeps getting richer. And something is happening in the east wing of the White House where it's been destroyed. And I don't know why Palantir is so interested in forming a construction. We're not paying attention to what's being built on the grounds of the White House. At the same time, the Epstein files. Please don't forget the Epstein files. Because at the least, it looks like Donald Trump is protecting pedophiles. At the worst, it looks like Donald Trump is a pedophile who may have raped children. How much of all this craziness is related to distracting us from the fact that the Epstein files have not been released or have
no argument for me there. Like significant amount. I completely agree with you on that.
So I'm not sure. Donald Trump, one thing for sure that he has proved over the course of his entire life is that one person he really cares about is himself. He has proved this over and over again with his multiple marriages, his actions. He only cares about himself. This is a man who's not there to serve the public or the American people or the country. He's there to serve himself. So anyways, I don't want to go into psychoanalyzing.
No. I didn't mean to particularly.
A madman.
Yeah, I didn't mean to particularly drag us down that road, but it's always sort of a clarification that I want to make, that it's like it's important to remember that people are not, and I say this with sort of in a way to affirm grace to people that I disagree with or I think have been sort of like done wrong by the system. There's absolutely evil people out there that are sort of sick and selfish and whatever. But I think there's a lot of people that are just sort of duped by a situation and they deserve a lot more respect and dignity. And so
absolutely. And I never speak. I think every person who either voted or did not vote for Donald Trump, it is not for us to question their votes. What we have to also remind folks is regardless of what we're thinking about and what we're being terrorized by, 42 million Americans still don't have enough to eat.
Right.
Millions of Americans still don't have access to health insurance. Millions of Americans are struggling with the housing crisis. Our children do not have many of our children across the country don't have access to high quality public education because the public education is being gutted. Here in New Hampshire, our property taxes are going up so much that I've heard from seniors that told me, Karishma, I'm one payment away from becoming homeless. Think about it. A senior citizen in this climate they did everything right. They worked all their life. They saved. They bought a house. They thought about how much will their Social Security or their retirement benefits allow them to pay for. They thought about the mortgage. They thought about the taxes. They created a life that would allow them to retire with dignity. And now, because of the rise in property taxes, these folks are now sometimes on the brink of disaster, of becoming homeless. And we have to come back and discuss it. Why are so many people in New Hampshire struggling? And I want us to understand it. How can we improve their lives? We have a severe healthcare crisis across the country and also New Hampshire. We need to pass a single-payer universal healthcare to cover every American, and a system that'll be cheaper than the current system of $5 trillion. We can make that happen with Medicare for all. Folks, Donald Trump is distracting us with his violent rhetoric, his hate, his racism, his threats. But please don't forget that people on the ground on a daily basis are suffering from the fact that they don't have health insurance. And because I'm a scientist, I do talk a lot about numbers. Carter, 50,000 Americans die each year because of either they don't have health insurance or because of underinsurance. Just stop for a second and think about that. 50,000 Americans die each year. That is a huge national security threat. 50,000 Americans are dying because of some domestic policy. We really should be taking care of that. And that should be considered a national security threat.
No, I completely agree with you. And I'm very glad. I'm glad that we are talking about this, because with the limited time we have left, I did want to actually sort of get to, I definitely, we're sort of limited on time this evening. So I didn't get to
I'm looking at the clock
No, it's fine. I would rather us go and maybe have another session at another day or time than try and, truncate any of our responses or bottle them up. I think it's much better to do it this way. Mm-hmm. With the time that we have left, I think it's one thing when you're campaigning, and I'm glad that we've pivoted to domestic policy, because I think that's where I want to end, because I think that's the most important part. It's easy when you're campaigning to argue for very broad stroke concepts that we want to achieve, right? My question is more so about, like, specifically, what policies do you prioritize the highest when you get there? If you're going to actually sort of team up with other legislators and senators in the Congress to address some of these issues, if you're going to go down and pursue specific pieces of written legislation, what would those look like? What exactly do you sort of have on your checklist right now that, like, you get in there, you get that position? What are you going after specifically that's going to create material change for not just people in New Hampshire, but Americans that are struggling so hard every day?
Yeah. So actually, it is a little bit of a long list. Is that okay?
That is fine. Maybe, yeah. Okay. You don't have to go too deep, but I do understand. I'm here for it.
Yes. So one is, we need to give people livable wages. People, even outside of the price gouging, even outside of the high cost of groceries and the high cost of electricity and other utilities, people just are not making enough. It is not keeping up with inflation. It's just not keeping up. We need to increase the minimum wage. It's embarrassing. It is actually cruel that our federal minimum wage is stuck at $7.25 since 2009. That is absolutely unacceptable. We need to increase the federal minimum wage, because that will also impact the other wages that are sort of just above the federal minimum wage. We need to give people livable wages. Somebody who works full time in the United States, in the richest country in the world, should be able to afford food, housing, and healthcare. They deserve livable wages. So that's one thing. The other is, we need to build affordable housing. There's so many folks who are struggling. And homelessness does not mean, Carter, that you're out on the street, which is absolutely tragic. A lot of times folks are just unable to afford to move out of their parents' homes, or they're couch surfing, they're sleeping in a closet on someone's floor. That's also a face of homelessness. They just don't have a home of their own. And the other is healthcare. So I would say livable wages, housing, healthcare, those are my three priorities. Everyone
What would
deserves
you
that.
So let me drill down a little bit on that, because I think this is important. What would you consider the acceptable minimum wage to be set at? Like, let's put a real number on that. What dollar per hour would you like to see Americans get paid as a baseline?
Um, at least $20 should be our federal minimum wage. At least 20. Because if you think about when the minimum wages started to be put together, came into being, so this was around the time of FDR. If we had kept up with inflation, the federal minimum wage right now would be about $60 an hour. Okay, we're at $7.25. MIT has this wage calculator. It's a website that's available to anyone. Just go check it out. Put in your state and just check how much a single person with no dependents have to make in order to survive on 40-hour work week. I mean, I hope everyone understands somebody who works 40 hours per week, shouldn't they be able to afford food, housing, and healthcare? So this is one thing. So at least 20. But
Would you be
according to that
willing?
MIT calculator in New Hampshire, you have to make about $25 an hour at this moment if you don't have any dependents. If you have dependents, you actually need to make more than 25 in order to have enough to buy food and pay for rent.
Would you be willing to tie that to
Sorry, go ahead.
inflation? No, yeah, it's okay.
Yes, absolutely. But let's just start with let's just jump it up and then start. Because, of course, people are going to say, how can it'll take us a little bit of time for us to adjust. Absolutely. So let's just give people a boost, bring people just to be able to afford food, and then absolutely tie it to inflation and have a formula that actually makes sense. Of course, people are the oligarchy. The billionaires will come back and repeat the rhetoric that this is going to hurt small businesses. The people who benefit from keeping the wages low are the billionaires. So let's look at Walmart, for example. Walmart, the family that is the majority shareholder of Walmart is the Walton family. They're billionaires. And yet they pay such low wages to their employees that some of them qualify for Medicaid, or they have to go to the food banks or the food pantries to get food. We are subsidizing Walmart, the Walton family, the billionaire family, by basically supporting their employees who are getting starvation wages. There's no reason why Walmart cannot be a profitable company within reason, and at the same time allow all their employees to have the dignity of being able to survive on a 40-hour work week. There's no reason whatsoever. There's so much.
And the interesting fold over on that too. The interesting fold
Yeah.
over on that I always like to point out is it's like, let's say you've got a Walmart employee that's receiving EBT. Where do you think they are spending those EBT dollars?
On Walmart, yeah. In Walmart.
So the direct subsidy goes back into the pockets of the Walton family.
Yes.
So they're sort of double dipping in that way.
They're double dipping, yes. And
so
this is one thing I do want to say about, just to tie it to foreign policy. Folks might say, I don't want to think about foreign policy. I'm struggling just to make ends meet. And there was a time in my life when I was trying to survive on minimum wage. This was back in the 1990s. And back then the minimum wage was $4.25 an hour. And my rent was $500. Trying to make the monthly rent was a headache all the time. You're just worried, how am I going to make rent? Because if you don't make rent, then you're homeless. And then food was always secondary, and healthcare was not even an issue. It was a luxury. I had no way to be able to either afford healthcare, and the jobs that I had that were paying minimum wage did not even offer healthcare as a benefit. I remember those days, and it's really, really hard. The anxiety, the stress that you are living through on a daily basis. At least, thank God, I only had to. It was a several year slump, and then afterwards I was able to go back, finish my education, and then get a higher paying job and then basically move out, or was able to get a higher paying job. But for many families, unfortunately, they stay in that trajectory for a long time. What does that mean in terms of the outcome? The life expectancy of a poor American right now is 10 to 15 years less than a rich American. 10 to 15 years less. A poor American is dying, has a shorter life than a rich American. That is a national security threat. That should be something we should talk about. So, and then going back, you were going to say something. Oh, foreign policy. I do want to say one thing about foreign policy. When people say, I pay so much in federal taxes, don't ask me to pay more. And I agree with them. My God, the middle income folks and anyone who has a salaried job is paying such high federal taxes. And I agree with them that they don't see the benefit of paying those high federal taxes, because they have to still supplement their children's education. They still have to supplement the premiums are high, right? The co-pays are high all the time. Those co-pay is another tax. The premium, those high premiums on health insurance is a tax. Let's not forget about that. So of course, property taxes is a tax.
Right.
But we will never have enough for our people as long as our foreign policy allows, or the defense industry takes away so much of our money on wars and conflicts across the world, in thousands of miles away. Billions of dollars are being spent that should be spent here for peace and democracy and to improve the lives of people here at home, instead of killing people overseas. We should care about foreign policy. Not even if you don't care about it from a moral perspective, you should care about it from a socioeconomic perspective, because those tax dollars that are going off in foreign land is not coming back to our society, not coming back to our schools, not coming back to our hospitals, our nursing homes, or our infrastructure, our roads, our police, libraries. So people should care. Okay, I'll stop there.
No, you're good. I just sort of really quick, and this will sort of like lightning answer this question, but in general, I know that you have a lot of positions on sort of getting big money out of politics.
Yes.
I know I don't mean to open the door to keep us here for another 30 minutes, but the question I want to sort of point specifically to is the sort of casinofication of our society. Right now, there's a lot going on with sort of Polymarket and the partnership between CNN and Kalshi, where people are now just betting on the news, and the way in which that sort of, if you haven't learned anything about it, I highly suggest checking into it, because it's really it's incredibly frightening to me.
Wow.
You are now able to do parlays and prop bets on what's happening in the news, which I think is absolutely just striking. And so for a lot of young people, they look at the only two possible ways that they can get out is to go viral on TikTok or YouTube or Twitch or whatever and become some sort of like high paid streamer that's making bank off of ad revenue, or to just straight up play the slot machine. Now, the problem with those particular avenues specifically is that they're very much so captured by insider trading and that particular type of corruption. And I think that's going to poison pill our entire society at just a light speed pace. I think the only mechanism to actually deal with this, and especially with sort of the prevalence and rise and ascendancy of AI and the degree to which it's just decimating the job market as we speak currently, I think antitrust needs to be a massive, massive part of any progressive campaign moving forward in the next ostensibly foreseeable future, but at the very least within the next 2-3 decades, this has to be just a top line item. And so I just want to, I know you're sort of running out of time. We're right up against that hour market right now, but I do want to just sort of get your take and hear your position specifically on how hard you intend to fight for specific antitrust developments to protect people.
Yeah, definitely. We have to, my God, the AI world, right? We don't even understand where it's going, but it's not going to a good place. This is not going to improve the lives of our folks. Like you pointed out, we are going to lose a lot of jobs. This is one impact. The other issue is the environmental impact of these data centers. So in some of these places, the utility costs have gone up by 10% because of data centers are in place. And the data centers actually pay less in the rate, the utility cost to them is actually lower than the cost to the residents. It's impacting us so badly. Our economy is going to be impacted because of job loss. Our utility prices are going to go up, environmental consequences because of greenhouse gas emissions, everything. I don't know about this slot machine that you just talked about. I actually don't know anything.
Yeah.
I want to look into this. And again, I try not to answer questions about issues that I haven't,
Understood.
I don't understand
Understood.
it. But I'm really, it's, I want us to give hope to our kids. I mean, I have two young folks. My daughter just became 20. She was 19. I used to say I have two teenagers now. I have a 20-year-old and a 16-year-old. I want them to not wake up and dread life. I want them to not be afraid to turn 26 and lose their parents' health insurance. I want them to not be burdened with a high loan for higher education because they wanted to study, receive a higher education. I want them to be able to dream big, explore life. I want them to believe that there's not an existential threat on our planet. I want the next generation. I want to protect the next generation. I want them to know that things are going to be okay and that I want them to feel better. I want them to know that we're going to take care of them. And I don't want them to inherit a planet that's burning. Yeah.
That's about as good as an answer as we can expect at this point in time, and I think it's a really lovely sentiment to end on. I think you've certainly made a lot of very convincing arguments to me, and just throughout you're doing quite the spate of appearances on different outlets right now, just like getting into the left spaces, and I really appreciate that. I wish you good luck in your sort of pursuit for more progressive endorsements. Hopefully there's an opportunity to have you back on at some point. Maybe we can discuss some of the things that we didn't get to today because there's obviously just way too many. But it was an absolute pleasure to have a conversation with you today. Thank you so much for taking the time out to join me and have this conversation.
Thank you, Carter.
And that does it for the interview today, folks. Thank you so much. If you enjoyed this content, please consider becoming a subscriber on YouTube. You can hit me up on Patreon and support the channel if you dig this kind of content. The more we have going in there, the more easier, the better it makes it for me to continue to create time to do these particular segments and expand the channel. So with that, thank you guys so much, and we will catch you next time.